In this exciting episode, oh, what tangled webs we weave when first we practice to take anonymous phone calls in local drugstores. It's Season 1, Episode 28 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Daring Decoy. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple. Provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made from TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode, I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each week in the Law Library, we return to prior episodes to refresh our memories about Perry's past so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. Prompted by a question from my mother, I thought we might make a tally of the people who ask Perry for a deeper explanation of his legal exploits.
You know, there is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Our current episode, The Case of the Daring Decoy, ends with a question from the defendant. This isn't the first time that's happened. Evelyn Bagby, Peter Cole, and Frank Lawton have asked questions in the denouements of previous episodes. A little more frequent is when a person closely associated to the defendant asks a final question of Mason. Think of Helen Waters, Marv's fiancée in the case of the drowning duck. There's Clara, the nurse, in the case of the sulky girl. Harvey Delano, Barbara Eden's boyfriend, in the case of the sulky girl. And then fiancé Dane Grover in the case of the Crimson Kiss. And then there are some more quirky entries. 2 times it's been Tragg who's asked Mason to clarify something in the case of the nervous accomplice and in the case of the haunted husband. It was Berger who asks the question in the case of the Sunbather's Diary. Perhaps most interestingly, the murderer himself asks the question in the case of the demure defendant, Pappy. And then in the case of the Crooked Candle, no one asks a question. It seems like that one's sewn up, and most of the time is spent with Paul asking Perry for some cash.
Perry, I gotta make this fast. I forgot to cash a check. Could you let me have 50?
Well, sure.
You better make it 75.
And now to the 2 big ones, Della and Paul. Paul asks Perry to clarify something 5 times. Case of the silent partner, moth-eaten mink, the baited hook, one-eyed witness, and last week's episode, Case of the desperate daughter. But the king of all question askers, that's definitely everyone's favorite slightly befuddled PI, Paul Drake himself. Roll that montage!
Women. I'll never understand them. Here she takes the guy back after she almost gets herself killed because of him.
Oh, you're wrong, Paul. Lutz was the target from the start. And with that shooting stand, Herbert couldn't miss.
Yeah, but Roxy said that... But what about the press?
You handle them.
Are you kidding? I don't know the answers myself. Suppose they ask me what made you suspect Myrtle in the first place. You know, the thing that puzzles me is Uncle Charlie. Who did him in?
Well, did Sheldon kill Callender?
I still don't see how you pegged Dolores as the killer. The reason I dropped by, something puzzles me. I know that you suspected Doyle when you saw a copy of Dr. Gross's criminal investigation in his apartment. But what was in the book that clinched things for you? Oh, I still don't figure what made you suspect Mrs. Kirby. I know I shouldn't ask embarrassing questions. But why did Johnny Hale confess?
How did her luck run out?
Does that answer your question?
Yep, 9 episodes thus far. Paul has been the one who wanted Perry to clarify something for him. Now, without further ado, let's get to the plot of this episode. The case of the Daring Decoy. Daniel Conway runs a huge oil concern, a publicly traded company that apparently gives lots of ma's and pa's out there important monthly dividends. Unlike his opponent in the corporation, the philandering Warner Griffith, Conway actually cares about his shareholders. Alas, Conway's getting played. First, Griffith's girlfriend, Rose Calvert, steals a key document from Conway's office.
Hello, Warner? Warner, it's me, Rose. I've got them, Warner. The papers you wanted. All right, I'll wait for you.
Next, Conway gets an anonymous phone call that leads him to a hotel room where he finds Rose Calvert's body. Conway does have enough sense to get in touch with Perry.
So my first thought was to get in touch with our corporation counsel. I finally found Mr. Varnell at the Bar Association dinner.
Rather a stroke of luck that you were sitting at the same table with me, eh, Mason? I must tell you again how much Mr. Conway appreciates this.
On the job in no time at all, Perry discovers the titular decoy was none other than Warner Griffith's wife.
Now, what can I do for you?
You might start by telling me why you phoned my client, Dan Conway, earlier this evening and led him into a trap.
I did no such thing. What gave you that idea?
Now, Mrs. Griffith, we're reasonably intelligent people. You used a telephone. Calls can be traced.
But I didn't use it. I walked into it, didn't I?
At first, she claims she is Conway's ally, as she has recently discovered her husband's wandering ways.
One of his hobbies is photography. I won't comment on the others. I found 3 poses like that in an undeveloped roll of film in his camera.
But as it turns out, her love for the rascally Griffith also led her to cover her tracks and her husband's tracks and leave Conway holding the murder weapon and the rap for its crime.
I went up there so angry at Warner, I wouldn't have cared if he'd been skewered alive. I hated him. And then I saw her dead. And I thought Warner did it. What can I do? 1 second I hated him, and the next I had to protect him somehow. I had to make sure the police didn't think of him.
The episode's conclusion notably gives us no clue as to what will happen to the Griffith marriage. Wheels within wheels indeed. Mason uncovers Mrs. Griffith's double dealing thanks to the case's most intriguing witness, Mavis, the elevator operator. Carrying with her validation for her amazing memory from pretty big Pac-10 school, Mavis picks apart witnesses by looking at their shoes.
You see, I sit all day at the elevator controls and I read when I'm not too busy, which I'm never too busy anyway. So mostly I see shoes and feet, so it's kind of a hobby. I study them.
Have you any documentation for this unusual ability?
Well, not outside of the tests they made of me at Stanford.
What were the findings of these tests?
They called me phenomenal, a quirk of nature.
Her peculiar ability helps her identify Conway and Mrs. Griffith, 2 of the interested parties, and Perry also uses her to bait Rose Calvert's simpering husband into confessing the crime. Let's talk about Fred Calvert, the husband of the deceased. Once again, we have a spouse-on-spouse crime. Calvert's one talking point is the fact that he's paid off his home.
She has a good thing here with me. See, this house is all paid for. Not to send a mortgage on it. Oh, sure, she still likes to have some fun, and she's young, but I figure it's better to have your house paid for than to...
He offers his wife a chance to live mortgage-free. Well, if that doesn't sound too exciting, it's because it isn't. Rose is no good, but frankly, Calvert's no good either. His quiet demeanor hides, apparently, a murderous rage, and he lacks imagination. His confession is basically just an acknowledgement that Perry has described the crime just as it happened.
Then you went to that hotel room and you killed her.
Yes. Just the way you said it, Mr. Mason. Almost exactly the way you said it.
As the episode ends, the freed Daniel Conway learns that he's got a friend in Amelia Armitage, an unmarried Texan whose family owns 37% of the company.
Good night, Mr. Conway.
Wait a minute, madam. Mrs.
Miss. I'm not married, Mr. Conway.
Della, for one, predicts wedding bells.
He's about 33, isn't he? That's a good age for her, don't you think?
What are you up to now, Miss Fixit?
Well, I just thought since they were both so interested in Cal, Texas, it would be a good time for a merger.
All I have to say to the pair is this: marriages never end well in this show. Run for the hills, Daniel and Amelia. Run for the hills! Now let's discuss the 1957 novel that the episode was based on. Yeah, you heard me right. This novel was published a scant 6 months before this episode hit the television airwaves. That's a pretty quick turnaround. The book is pretty similar to the adaptation, so Gardner must have been writing at this point with eventual TV adaptations in mind, although there are some slight differences. One, Warner Griffith is named Gifford Farrell in the book, and he's even more of a schnook than in the show. Rose Calvert is just the latest example of his roving eyes and hands. Yuck. Number two, no Amelia Armitage in the book. It seems like in the book, Conway's secretary is sweet on him, and she helps him in the beginning of the novel, but then she disappears and never really reappears. Number three, Conway doesn't actually find Rose Calvert's body in the hotel room he's sent to. Instead, Mrs. Griffith, or in the show, Mrs. Farrell, gets Conway to take the offending gun in a pretty risque way that leaves Conway not only holding a potential murder weapon, but also having to tell a story about how he got the gun that few would believe. The narrator gives us this sequence directly so we don't have to simply trust Conway's veracity. At this point, Gardner was obviously following the template of the show by leading with everything that the defendant had gone through before he encounters Mason, rather than starting with Mason. Number four, Mr. Calvert doesn't boast about his mortgage. He owns a gas station and lives out in the country, and I kept waiting for the classic "not a cent of mortgage" line. It never comes. Number five, perhaps most intriguingly, the novel gives Paul Drake a love interest. Unlike the dashing William Hopper, Gardner's lanky Paul rarely makes hay with the ladies. In this novel, however, he goes out on some dates with Myrtle, the name of the elevator operator. That's right. She's not university certified, but she is Paul Drake certified. Hello. Now, I haven't read a single novel for the podcast that includes the murderer overtly confessing to the crime. And this one is no different. Obviously, you like to have closure for the show. Fred Calvert in the episode confesses. That's not what happens in the book, although he does obviously indicate his guilt. It's interesting that even when Gardner is so clearly writing books that can then become TV shows, he does not include this key moment that's in all the TV shows, that is the murderer confessing to the crime. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. A Della is something about a particular character in the story. And a Perry is something we learn about our main character. Our Paul this week concerns mortgages in 1958. Hey, did you hear that Mr. Calvert's house doesn't have a cent of mortgage on it? Not 1 cent. That's security.
House is all paid for, not a cent of mortgage on it. I told her just before she left, I said, Rose, this is security for you. The rest of your life.
Here's the research prompt for this week. How much would a house in Ellendale, California have cost circa 1958? And what exactly did the typical 1958 house mortgage look like? A bonus research prompt: are there actually people out there with university-validated skills in identifying people by their feet? Inquiring minds want to know. Which leads us to this week's Della, the feet-identifying wunderkind Mavis Jordan, played by Natalie Norwick.
Miss Jordan, you say you were reading a book when you took the defendant to the 7th floor?
That's right.
What was the name of this book?
You could die laughing.
Was it,
Born in 1923 in Smithtown, New York, Norwick would have been riding high in 1958, coming off back-to-back years in 56 and 57 of starring in pretty good Hollywood films. 1956's 23 Paces to Baker Street was a classic noir with Van Johnson, and 1957's Hidden Fear was directed by Andre de Toth, another famous noir director. Norwick went on to star in 7 episodes of Have Gun Will Travel, a season 1 episode of Star Trek, and even 7 episodes of the camp classic Dark Shadows before retiring to Florida in the 1980s. Lots of interesting footwear there, I hear. She died at the age of 84 in 2007. Our Perry this episode concerns Perry's business acumen. The old foxy lawyer learns the supposedly wise Warner Griffith a trick or two.
Then wouldn't it have been good business practice for Cal Texas to have made arrangements with a few smaller companies in order to buy these lands and leases for Cal Texas? And wasn't that in truth exactly what Daniel Conway was doing?
Well, if Conway was manipulating things like that, it wasn't apparent to me.
It's rather an obvious business maneuver, isn't it? As a man who aspires to be president of Cal Texas, it should be obvious to you, shouldn't it?
Well, there are wheels within wheels.
Yeah, WG, Durhay, get your corporate takeover scheme right, man. Our theme for this episode is private and public infidelity. This episode causally connects marital infidelity to corporate infidelity. Warner Griffith cheats on his wife, and he's using his mistress, Rose Calvert, to try and cheat Daniel Conway and the shareholders out of their money. Given his duplicitous dealings with both his wife and Conway, it appears Griffith only cares about himself. Thus, the episode draws a strong contrast between Griffith, the aging, grifting philanderer, and Conway, the young, gracious bachelor. It turns out, of course, that Griffith is as bad at business as he is at love. When we get Della's final line about a merger, we're at once hopeful. Here's the possibility of mixing personal, romantic, and business integrity, should Conway and Armitage marry, and worried at the same time. Romance is a big enough problem in Perry's world. Why mix romance with business? It seems like a recipe for disaster. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. It's bound to happen. People want to help Perry, so they volunteer to testify for his client without any real clear evidence. Here's how Perry reacts.
I know that Mr. Conway is innocent.
How?
Well, I just know it, that's all.
I'm afraid our courts don't recognize womanly intuition as evidence.
To be fair, it's not just womanly intuition that Perry despises. The entire show is premised on the intuitive leaps men like Berger and Trag et al. Make in deciding who to prosecute. So the proverb's meaning is clear. You bring Perry some facts or you don't bring anything at all. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
You know, there is one thing I don't understand. Go on, Paul.
Thanks to everyone who responded to the previous couple of episodes, my father asks concerning Perry's death row case in the case of the desperate daughter, quote, could it be that Perry is handling the appeal on a case lost by someone else? To which I respond, yes, it's very possible. In our next episode, the case of the hesitant hostess, we'll discover that Perry does do pro bono work. It's possible that some other lawyer who has gotten his client on death row has turned the case over to Perry to write the appeal. It would be a first, though. Perry doesn't usually take clients who are already convicted, or we haven't seen it happen before. My Aunt Myra and loyal listener Marge both chipped in to help answer last week's research prompt about amnesia. First, as Aunt Myra points out, the distinction the show makes between partial and total amnesia is a pretty specious one, as the condition is understood now by medical professionals. Generally, amnesia is one of two kinds. It can affect past memories, retrograde amnesia, or it can prevent the sufferer from forming new memories. This is called anterograde amnesia. Doris's amnesia in the show was likely supposed to be head trauma that triggered retrograde amnesia. She slips up, however, and she remembers too many things to have truly been suffering from retrograde amnesia. More than likely, if she had knocked her head during the accident, she would have been suffering something like post-traumatic amnesia, which would have affected her memory surrounding the event that caused the head trauma, but little else. As to the legal standing of somebody with amnesia, Marge writes in, quote, while amnesia does not make a defendant incompetent to stand trial like being mentally ill would, a man who got into a car accident while fleeing a robbery and could not remember the crime would not be competent to stand trial, perhaps. So that's a very interesting wrinkle. It doesn't determine responsibility necessarily, but if the amnesia made the person who was charged with the crime currently incompetent to stand trial, it may delay legal proceedings. And my Aunt Myra adds that amnesia can be a complicating factor as a judge determines the appropriate penalty for a crime. Want another research prompt from the case of the desperate daughter? Marge adroitly asks, what kind of legal standing does Lisa Bannister have in terms of staying in the country, since she married a citizen yet obviously had forged visa papers to get her to this country in the first place? As always, I'd love feedback about the case of the Daring Decoy or the podcast in general if you're catching up with past episodes. Was there something about this week's pod that you'd like to comment on or something you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website at theperrypod.libsyn.com or email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. All Perry Pod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Next time, Della goes a-modeling and gets told to drop the coat by a gum-chewing gangster who calls heroin snow. It's no joke, it's the case of the hesitant hostess. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!